Good evening and welcome everybody to the second part of Dermot and Phillip's political broadcast with special guest Ronan McGreevy. We started last week with the from 1916, the Easter Rising, and tonight we're going to start on the War of Independence and see what we can make sense of all that happened in 1919 and 1921. So joining me tonight is our usual co-host Ronan McGreevy from the Irish Times. Ronan is an eminent journalist and a historian and author. His most recent book was the Sean Lemass, The Lost Memoir, which was on the bestsellers list there for a while, and his numerous other books, including the Don Tidy Kidnapping in Ballinamore, and also a book called Where the Firing Line Extends. I think, is that right? For
the Irish firing line extends island in the Western Front. Yeah.
That's it. Ronan, we're going to kick straight into it here. We went last week up to about 1919, and now we've got in January 19 the Dáil meets, and there is and it's an independent. They've established an independent Irish Parliament called the Dáil, and then shortly after that, all hell breaks loose down in County Tipperary with the solo head beg ambush.
Yeah. So, it actually happened on the same day, the 21st of January, 1919, and the two events were not connected to each other. The solo head beg ambush had been planned for several days, and it was just on the 21st of January, coincidentally, that Dan Breen and Sean Tracy and those hijacked the cart of Gelignite and killed two RIC officers, Royal Irish Constabulary officers, and that's seen as the start of the War of Independence. And at the same time, you had in the Mansion House the creation of the First Dáil, which involved the 73 Sinn Féin MPs who had been elected in the British Parliament on an abstentionist platform, but they decided to convene the First Dáil instead. Now, the two events become conflated in people's minds, but the one wasn't associated with the other. In fact, Arthur Griffith, who was still titular leader of Sinn Féin at the time, was very angry about this incident, which had in some ways overshadowed the creation of the First Dáil. But anyway, so you have this twin track approach. You have the constitutional parliamentary approach to Irish independence, which is the creation of the First Dáil, and then you have the violence as exemplified by the attack at Solo Head Beg.
And I think behind a lot of these events was the sort of, I suppose, a tactical genius that was Michael Collins. I mean, so guerrilla warfare, but he certainly brought it home to Ireland, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he would have. I mean, at that stage, right, the Irish volunteers who fought in the 1916 Rising had learned a lot from that debacle, because essentially, while they fought very bravely, their whole military strategy was, to be sitting ducks in places like the GPO and Boland's Mills and so on. So the tactics in relation to the War of Independence were they gradually evolved throughout the course of 1919 and 1920. I mean, it was apparent from the very beginning that the IRA, it didn't become the IRA till August 1919, but we'll call it the IRA for they couldn't defeat the British in an open war. That was impossible. So essentially, their idea was to make Ireland uncomfortable, which was a very astute tactic, and it was also predicated on the basis that the Irish people were on their side and not on the side of the British. Initially, there was a lot of opposition, even in national circles, to violence, but the reprisals by the British, which really began in 1920, and the coming of course, our infamous Black and Tans and the auxiliaries, really made the people much more receptive to the IRA's campaign. And by the end of it, July 1921, the British realised that they weren't wanted in Ireland anymore. Certainly in the 26 counties anyway.
Yeah, I mean, just go back to the Black and Tans. I mean, they were when you mention the Black and Tans now, it still sends a shiver down some people's spines.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe the Black and Tans, while they were mainly consisting of ex-servicemen who had been serving in the army during the First World War, there was also a rumor, or maybe it's true, that an awful lot of guys were let out of prison to join the Black and Tans, and were told, "Listen, we're not going to be too critical of what you carry out in Ireland as long as you get the job done." So I think that was probably borne out by some of the antics they got up to when they were here. They were
So so basically the British thought that what they were dealing with was they thought they were dealing with basically a ginger group, a kind of a unrepresentative bunch of extremists in the IRA, and they were reluctant to call it a war. So they left the Royal Irish Constabulary basically as the front line in the fight against the IRA. And the RIC proved to be not up to the job, basically. And that's when Winston Churchill had the bright idea to bring in the Black and Tans. These were basically, as you say, ex-servicemen. I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't know. I don't really know if that is true about them letting sort of scumbags out of jail and that to come to Ireland. They didn't need to, because there was so many unemployed ex-servicemen around the place that they that they didn't have any problem filling the ranks. Now, essentially, the Black and Tans were not part of the British Army, and that's an important distinction. They were regarded as an auxiliary to the police force, so they didn't have military discipline as such. The reason why they're called the Black and Tans, this is important, is that the black was the uniform of the RIC, and the tan, which is the khaki, was the British Army uniform, and they didn't have enough black uniforms for all the Black and Tans, as they call them, and that's how they got the name, after a pack of hounds actually from County Tipperary. And so you have the Black and Tans and the auxiliaries. Now the auxiliaries are different. The auxiliaries are actually something of an elite. They're drawn from the officer classes in the British Army from the First World War, whereas the Black and Tans were just basically, they were gathered from whatever dregs of the British Army wanted the job. But the auxiliaries were regarded in some ways as better soldiers. They had been some of them were private soldiers. Some of them had been, commissioned officers in the British Army. A lot of them had risen up to the ranks. So those two organizations were brought in by the British government to assist the Royal Irish Constabulary, because the British government did not want the British public to think that they were engaged in a war.
And I think, am I right in saying too that while the auxiliaries were probably officer class mostly, as you say, but they were also got a reputation for very violent activities at times. They weren't too shy in putting the boot in, for want of a better phrase. As well as their compatriots in the Black and Tans.
So yeah, you're right. So essentially what happened the War of Independence, really, it's actually quite short. It really starts in January 1920 with the mass burning of RIC barracks by the IRA. This was an attempt to basically make it impossible for the RIC to operate in the countryside in Ireland, and to clear the countryside of a lot of the British presence. And then I think around March 1920, you get these mercenary soldiers basically over from Britain, right? And a blind eye was turned to their activities, and essentially what they were doing was, once, if for instance there was a raid on an RIC convoy, they would retaliate by, for instance, burning Balbriggan to the ground, which they did. They burned Cork in 1920. They burned an awful lot of different places as acts of revenge, and this was counterproductive tactics, because the British really lost the War of Independence, not from a military point of view, but from the point of view of public opinion, not just public opinion in Britain, but public opinion where it really matters, which is in the United States of America. And essentially what happened was that with all these sort of reprisals, which were getting huge press in the United States and elsewhere in Europe, Lloyd George and Churchill both knew that they were getting a odious reputation in the eyes of the world. And in fact, Churchill's wife, Clementine, wrote to him once and said, you don't want these filthy Hunnish tendencies to be seen in Ireland. And so the British from the beginning, even though they had superior resources on paper to the Irish, to the IRA, they pursued the wrong tactics.
Yeah. Michael Collins, again, I mean, was very aware of the need for intelligence around Dublin. I mean, the rumour has it that he had spies in Dublin Castle.
Oh, he did. There weren't rumours. I mean, he did. He had the spy in the castle, a guy called Nelligan, who was actually one of the chief intelligence officers in the British Army. He had a brilliant spy network, right? And his approach to the intelligence war was, firstly, Irish rebellions in the past had failed because of the British had infiltrated them. Like, for instance, the Fenian Rebellion of 1867, which was a very good point. So Collins knew from the beginning that he would have to beat the British at the intelligence game, right? So if you go back to what he did in 1920, he was ruthlessly executing British spies. He was ruthlessly executing those he felt were working for the British state. And this, of course, culminated in the famous Bloody Sunday of November 1920, in which he had got all the details together of what's known, loosely speaking, as the Cairo Gang. These were British officers who were either spying on the IRA or were engaged in judicial activities against the IRA, like ordering the execution of IRA prisoners. And
I've got a theory about that, actually. I've got a theory about that. We'll come back to that in a minute. I have a theory about that particular thing. Well, we'll just carry on, though. The intelligence thing now, I'm going to refer to the film Michael Collins, which I think probably the most inaccurate part of it is the portrayal of Ned Broy.
Yeah.
He ends up on a cart in the middle of O'Connell Street in the film, but actually, I think he actually went on to be Garda Commissioner in real life.
He did. Yeah.
I don't know why Neil Jordan actually did it that way. Could he not picked another name or used the real name of the spy?
Yeah, so Ned Broy was the guy who got him into. In fact, it's right beside the Irish Times, into what's now Pearse Street Garda Station, where all the files on the IRA were kept. And of course, the Michael Collins, the film, is a dramatic representation of what happened. But in fact, he did get, not only did Collins get information on who were the British spies in Dublin, but he also got a lot of information on the double agents who were involved in spying on the Irish, and he had them ruthlessly executed. In fact, the IRA executed approximately 90 to 100 people during the War of Independence who they suspected of being spies. And it's really the only time when the IRA, and this is the difference between the new IRA, or the provisional IRA, and the old IRA, the only time that the IRA in the War of Independence actually targeted civilians was when they believed that they were spies or collaborating with the British in some way.
Now, just to go back to the Bloody Sunday and November the 21st, 1920, if that's the morning or the day that Michael Collins decided to send out his boys, the squad, out to eliminate the Cairo Gang, right?
Yeah.
Now, as we know, there was a football match, a challenge match organised for the same day in Croke Park between Dublin and Tipperary.
Yeah.
Now, surely Michael Collins, with his intelligence know-how, should have anticipated that there was going to be retribution from the British forces after the events of the morning. Do you not think he may have let that game go ahead intentionally, knowing that whatever happened there would also further the cause of Irish independence, that the British would get such a bad press out of it?
I think that's looking at it retrospectively. I think what happened in Croke Park was extraordinary. So basically, what happened with the match went ahead because it was a fundraiser for Republican prisoners at that stage, and was always going to go ahead. And it's funny, strangely enough, now that you mentioned it, the British never cancelled it. They could have cancelled it, but essentially what happened was that the British auxiliaries and black and tans targeted that game not to kill. The initial idea was not to kill people, but it was to basically round up all the Republicans that they could find there. They figured that it would be a turkey shoot for them. Why they ran amok and started shooting into the crowd, it's just extraordinary. I mean, they claimed afterwards that they had been shot at themselves, but that's not true. Yeah. But it was an absolute public relations disaster for the British, totally infamous episode. And it was they tried to explain it away. The British tried to explain it away, saying that they had been fired on, very like the Bloody Sunday of 1972 as well. But as you say yourself, like this led to such a backlash against the British that, in fact, you start seeing the peace feelers as early as December 1920. There's a guy called Archbishop Clune who's from Perth, and he's contacted by the British to try and make peace with the Irish. So even in December 1920, we're already getting the idea that the British are beaten. Really, they realize that they realize that they're not wanted in most of Ireland anymore, and now it's a case of trying to get out with some honour intact.
Yeah, I think after the Bloody Sunday, I think most of the activities seem to be taking place in Munster, and especially in Cork.
Cork, yeah.
Cork was nearly burnt down in December 1920, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, that's after. Yeah, so Cork is by far the most active county. There's a number of reasons for that. It had some very, very good commanders down there, particularly, obviously, Tom Barry. And they had been pretty radicalized down there as well. And remember, Terence McSweeney, one of the reasons, one of the martyrs of the War of Independence was Terence McSweeney, who was the Lord Mayor of Cork, who was arrested by the British for spurious reasons, really, and of course he died in hunger strike in Brixton Prison. So you do have all of that down there, and then you have the most famous ambush of the war, of course, is the name escapes me, but it's the auxiliaries, not Bale na Blah, but it'll come back to me. Hang on a second. Tom Barry. What are we talking about here? The place that we're talking about is Kilmichael. Yeah. So the biggest defeat for the British involved Tom Barry at I think it was just after the burning of Cork. In fact, the auxiliaries he ambushed two or three lorry loads of auxiliaries and killed 18 of them. Shot them all, basically, including one who tried to run away. And these kind of guerrilla tactics, and then they obviously melted back into the hills, and because they had the support of the people at that stage, the British government was finding it very, very difficult to catch the IRA in the act. And it's at this stage, really, that the British government are saying, we either, go big or we go home. And go big would have meant actually calling in the army, maybe sending a couple of divisions into Ireland. This was contemplated, but it was never realistic because, first of all, the British people were sick of war. I mean, you have to remember, of course, we had the First World War from 14 to 18, and then they inherited a whole pile of problems elsewhere. They're fighting in Egypt, they're fighting in Palestine, they're fighting in Mesopotamia, which becomes Iraq in 1920. So they have all of these problems. So there's no political will to really try to effect a military solution to the Irish rebellion.
It was around this time too that they introduced the Government of Ireland Act, more or less splitting the country into two, 6 counties in the north and 26 in the south. Now, of course, the Northern Ireland institutions took effect immediately there because they were delighted, I think, just to get their own government. And that established the basis of partition, really. And then we're moving into 1921. And I mean, it was still, Cork seemed to be the place to be, or not to be, around that time. There was that's where most of the fighting was taking place. And I think that as you say, the Brits did not want to be in war, and it was costing them. I mean, you're operating wars on 4 or 5 different fronts, and especially after the cost of the First World War. That I think at that stage they just wanted out. And then that was the basis for the treaty negotiations that took place in the latter half of 21.
Yes. So in 1920, I think it's very important to get this in perspective. So the Irish have withdrawn from the British Parliament, but the British Parliament had unfinished business from before the First World War. So the Home Rule Act was on the statute books, right? And it had been postponed until the end of the war. So the British decided that they were going to implement the Home Rule Act anyway, even if the Irish didn't agree with it, and there was no Irish opposition to it in the House of Commons. So what they did was they granted a home rule settlement to 2 places. One was called Northern Ireland and the other was called Southern Ireland, which was the 26 counties. This is the basis of the partition we have nowadays. And of course, the Southern Ireland didn't accept this settlement at all. But in Northern Ireland, they set up their parliament in 1921, and so by the time the War of Independence is over, Northern Ireland has already been established as a separate political entity. And that's really important to consider when we talk about the treaty, because the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921 is a treaty between basically the 26 counties and Great Britain, because Northern Ireland had been established, right? And as far as the Brits were concerned, that was it, right? So so there was nobody in 1920 in the British Parliament to stop the Government of Ireland Act going through. So essentially, the partition of Ireland was done without any consultation with the Irish people at all.
Yeah. Then about halfway through, mid 21, then I think both sides were probably war weary at that stage. I think in July 21, then there was a truce. Ceasefire.
Yeah, there was a ceasefire. So essentially, the British had a big decision in the middle of 1921. Cope, who was the chief secretary, said that unless we send 40,000 troops to Ireland, we're done for, right? And this was a policy that my friend, who I wrote the book about, Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson, who was the chief of staff, the chief of the Imperial Staff, he was in favor of a sort of military solution by saturating the countryside with British soldiers. But as the head of the British Army at that time in Ireland said, even if you do this, right, every man is a Sinn Féin supporter at this stage. You're not going to be able to impose a military solution on a people who don't want it anymore. And so, and also the British realized as well in early 1921 that they didn't really have a strong hand in Ireland anymore. Now that they had they felt now that they had cauterized the whole northern thing by setting up Northern Ireland as a separate entity, that they could deal with the 26 counties, right? So that was the basis on which the talks began on the 11th of July, 1921.
Now, was it around that time, Ronan, that Field Marshal Wilson was actually assassinated?
No, that was later. That was in 22. That was after the War of Independence.
Right. Okay. That's fine. No. I know you wrote that book about him, and he was a divisive character, wasn't he? Really?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and he was of the belief that basically the only way to deal with the IRA was with shooting, basically shoot the leader, shoot this, but it wouldn't have worked at that stage. Even if they tried to do it, which they didn't try to do it. And he always complained basically about the British security forces in Ireland, trying to fight this insurrection with one hand behind their back. So he wanted a military solution. But Lloyd George was of the opinion at that stage that, there was no alternative to peace, but for peace. And remember as well, I saw something that I didn't say, is that the Irish, one of the reasons they founded the First Dáil was to elect some negotiators to go to the Paris peace talks, in which the fate of Europe was being decided, and a lot of huge small countries, scores of small countries end up out of that Paris peace treaty. But because Great Britain is a winner in the war, the case for Ireland is not considered at all. And so that's one of the reasons why the IRA resorted to violence. Violence was not the first resort; it was the second resort. But anyway, so in 1921, when it's all done, you start having the negotiations begin in July 1921 to try and come up with a solution.
And did they were they negotiating all the time or off and on up until December when the treaty was actually signed?
Well, the first person to go negotiating with the British. So, a few days after the ceasefire came into force, De Valera, who was the titular president of the Irish Republic, went over to see Lloyd George, and he had a list of demands, right? He wanted an independent republic. He wanted an independent Irish republic, and Lloyd George said to him, "No chance! Like, you're dreaming." And Lloyd George made the famous description of De Valera. He said it was like negotiating with De Valera was like trying to pick up mercury with a fork, right? So he left De Valera in no uncertain terms what was possible and what wasn't. And what wasn't possible was, as far as he was concerned, as De Valera was an Irish republic, and as far as Lloyd George was concerned, that was off the table. And it was also a recognition from the very beginning, and this was an important point for the British, that the head of state of whatever entity came out of Ireland as a result of the treaty would still be the British monarch.
Right. And, again, I'm going to refer briefly back to the movie, the Michael Collins movie again. You do get the impression from that by sending over Michael Collins after knowing what De Valera knew there, what you're after saying there, sending over Michael Collins was to literally achieve the impossible. So was Collins set up by Dev by sending him over to achieve the impossible?
That's a question that historians have pondered for the last 100 or so years. The idea behind De Valera not going to the peace negotiations. So let's get into the peace negotiations. I think the peace negotiations properly begin in October, and there are five what are called plenipotentiaries who are selected by Dáil Éireann to negotiate on behalf of the First Dáil, Second Dáil as it is then. So you have Collins, you have Arthur Griffith, you have Charles Gavin Duffy. The other two, I'm trying to remember their names now. It'll come back to me. But the important thing is that these five guys are sent over to London to negotiate, right? They set up in London, and the idea is that they report back to De Valera. And the idea that for De Valera, the reason why De Valera claimed he didn't go to the talks is that he wanted to be the negotiator of last resort, right? Now, this is not unusual. For instance, just you tend not to have negotiations between leader to leader until the very last, right? I mean, if you see, for instance, with the Iranian deal, I know it's fallen apart, but it was all, you know, the sort of foot soldiers who were negotiating this, and then it was up to Trump and the Iranian leadership to sign it. But anyway, the idea was, this is, De Valera said, don't sign anything until we have seen it, and we will negotiate. We will review it. Right now, there's a clear contradiction in this, because the 5 negotiators went over and they had plenipotentiary powers. In other words, they had the right to sign the treaty on behalf of the Irish people without recourse to Dublin. So there was a fundamental mismatch, a fundamental lack of understanding as to what was possible and what wasn't. And there was some confusion as to whether De Valera felt that he should have the final say. And there was the whole business as well of these men leaving London on a Friday evening, getting on, the boat and the ferry back to Dublin, spending the weekend negotiating, then going back to London. Whereas, the British had brought out their A team. I mean, obviously Lloyd George was involved in the negotiations. Churchill was involved in the negotiations. Birkenhead was involved in the negotiations. Tom Jones, not the singer, a very famous British civil servant. So they had their A team.
Yeah.
Whereas the captain of the Irish team was on the bench, to use a football analogy.
Is it correct also that the gun was literally put to their heads? They were told that they couldn't even make a phone call about the treaty, and if they didn't sign it by a certain time, Britain would invade Ireland again.
Yeah, so essentially the deal was this, right? The Irish delegation actually got a very good deal, right? The only difference as far as De Valera was concerned was whether or not there'd be an oath of allegiance to the British monarch, and whether or not Ireland would be part of the Commonwealth, right? Most of the rest of it was the same. The British made clear that the North was not up for negotiation, but Arthur Griffith managed to talk them out of that. So Article 12 of the treaty, which is a very important article, states that a boundary commission will be set up to determine the boundary according to the wishes of the people. But it's the clause is a bit more complicated than that. But at that stage, by December 1921, Lloyd George was getting fed up with the Irish delegation, and he said that there would be immediate and terrible war if they didn't sign within 2 hours. And he produced these 2 pieces of paper, and he said, "This is a letter for that I'm going to send to James Craig, saying that the treaty has been signed, or here's the letter saying that it hasn't been signed. If the treaty hasn't been signed, when I send this letter off, then all bets are off, and we will declare that we will go back into Ireland and we'll set the Royal Navy on the Irish." Now, was he bluffing? That's the big question. I think he was bluffing. I think a lot of historians think he was bluffing. He wasn't called the Welsh Wizard for nothing. He was a brilliant negotiator. But the bottom line is this, that Arthur Griffith, Arthur Griffith is the key man here. Arthur Griffith had negotiated with Lloyd George directly to get fiscal autonomy for Ireland. So everybody talks about what we didn't get with the oath of allegiance. That's just, all that stuff is just symbolic. The reality is when De Valera, when Lloyd George conceded to Arthur Griffith that Ireland, the Free State or whatever the entity was going to be called, would have complete fiscal autonomy from the British, Griffith said, "I'm signing the treaty," because he felt that was what he wanted. They wanted not only they wanted an independent state, but that they wanted fiscal autonomy. That was really, really important. So Griffith decides to sign the treaty on its own merits. And then the other four, including Michael Collins, fall into line. And they signed the treaty at 2:00 in the morning on the 6th of December, 1921. Now, you might ask yourself, surely for the want of, why did they not go back to Ireland and get De Valera to have a one look over it? The reason is that, as far as Arthur Griffith was concerned, he had spent 3 or 4 months negotiating. He wasn't going to get a better deal, and they had, as you said, plenipotentiary powers, and that whole ambiguity had not been resolved. So anyway, they signed the treaty at 2:00 in the morning. They get the mail boat back to Ireland, and by the time De Valera is woken up, he realizes that the treaty has been signed without his say-so, and of course he's bitterly angry about that.
Is it true too that Michael Collins is supposed to have stated once he signed the treaty that he says, "I've just signed my own death warrant"?
Yeah, he did say that. This is when he was talking to Birkenhead, Lord Birkenhead, who was one of the British negotiators. Birkenhead said, "Do you realize I probably signed my political death warrant?" And Collins is supposed to have said, "I've signed my actual death warrant." But anyway, he goes back. So they go back to Ireland, right? They've signed the treaty, and it's welcomed by the vast majority of people in Ireland. War's over, boys. And what has been offered to Ireland, and this is really important, offered to the 26 counties, is 2 things: dominion status. This is very much far more than the Home Rule settlement, which was on the table in 1912, right? So so essentially it means that Ireland is it's not described as this, but it's an independent country from the beginning. It has total control over it can raise an army. It has total control over its taxation, and it's able to go and make its own way in the world. So they come back to Ireland, and of course De Valera is not happy, and it goes to the cabinet, and he loses 4-3 at the cabinet level, right? So then we have the famous. So then it's up to Dáil Éireann to decide whether or not this treaty is going to be passed, and we have what's called the treaty debates, which you may have heard of, between December 19. We have a month of debates in. As it turned out, it was in Earlsfort Terrace, where the Dáil was at that time, to decide whether or not the members of Dáil Éireann are going to support the treaty. And this is some of the more bitterest, most highly charged debate in Irish history, it has to be said.
Right. Now, I think we're coming to a beautiful break in the road here, Ronan, where we're going to start into the reasons that the actual Civil War started, because of the opposition to the treaty by certain people. So then we're going to leave it there for this evening. Well, can I just I'll tell you what, yeah, that's fine. But let me just say one other thing, right? And then we can leave it at this, right? There's a debate in the Dáil about this, right? Which goes on for nearly a month, and the final decision is taken on the 7th of January 1922, and the Dáil passes the treaty by 64 votes to 57, and De Valera walks out with his followers from Dáil Éireann, and we're now in the situation whereby we're on the road to civil war. And that will be the subject of our next podcast next Sunday. Dermot's just rejoined us there. Dermot, I don't know if you heard any of that. That was a fascinating.
I did.
Fascinating insight.
It is, and you know how much I love the history and everything, and about this certain part of the history as well. And it shows that we've come from very sort of, our beginning was hard to become what we've become now. But I still believe, and I was hearing Ronan just very quickly saying that Dev, went over, but he knew he wasn't going to get it, didn't he, Ronan? Very quickly, yeah. He knew all he can come back with is what Michael Collins came back with. So, in a way, did he really set him up? Or was it really? Is that made more because of the movies, the books, the films? Has that made it more of a?
Yeah, I think
romantic.
I mean, you know, historians have been trying to divine the thought process that De Valera went through at this time period. What is undisputably true is that it was a gross dereliction of duty on his part, right?
Yeah.
But actually, we'll come on to the Civil War, but what were the differences between what the negotiators got and what De Valera got? And there was very, very little difference. De Valera, it was called external association. De Valera did not want to be part of the Commonwealth, and he did not want the British monarch as the head of state for Ireland. So he came up with this idea, this thing called document number 2, when he talked about external association, whereby there was some indefinable link between the Commonwealth and Ireland, but we weren't in the Commonwealth. I mean, this is what it boils down to. It was just Jesuitical sort of distinction. So, in fact, there's no guarantee that De Valera would have got a better deal from the treaty negotiators. And really, when we come on to talk about the Civil War, we're talking about, you know, people talk about it being a huge divide. There really wasn't. It was down to the simple
mistake.
Yeah, it was a huge mistake.
Well, also, just very quickly, Philip, later on as well, he does get one over the British by using the abdication one day, because when he did the Constitution, he used that loophole to get that out of the Irish Free State Constitution. To get that out, because of the abdication, it was one day longer. So he was very smart how he did it later. I think he learned a lot. But as you say,
he never made the same mistake again. Never made the same mistake again. But it was a terrible mistake to make. You know, it was a terrible mistake to make.
Do you think he regretted it, Ronan? Do you think he regretted it? Do you think he regretted it even after Collins was assassinated, Arthur Griffiths passed away? We know we're going to go on to it, but do you think he regretted it? I think he did. Late in the life,
I think he did. Yeah, I mean, he did regret it, absolutely. And you know, in the fullness of time, he came to realize that what he had done was wrong, but it was too late at that stage. But in truth, he learned from what happened then, and he never made the same mistakes again. He never any negotiation involving Ireland, he was front and center of it, and all his time as Taoiseach. So he did learn from that, but it was too late to prevent the Civil War.
So that's it. So next week we'll go on to the Civil War era, and there'll be more fascinating insight from Ronan. Ronan, thank you very much again. Your knowledge is second to none of that part of the Irish history. I must say it's really impressive. And thanks for coming on.
And will we see you back here at 8 o'clock, same time, same place next week?
Yeah, that's it. And then we can move on to the Civil War and aftermath. If we can manage to, within the time constraints, we'll move on to the next phase in Irish history. So that's next 8 o'clock. See you then.
So same time, same bat time, same bat place. See you next week. Bye.